gender at the Hebrew Union College, the Los Angeles campus. She was one of the first theologians to integrate feminist perspectives and concerns into Jewish text. Graduated from Northwestern University. In 1992, she began a woman's Talmud class in her home, teaching the text in original Hebrew and Aramaic, and this created the first rigorous Talmud study opportunity for lay women outside of New York and Israel. Originally a Reformed Jew, but converting to Orthodox Judaism in her teens, Adler made her final spiritual home in the Reform movement. On May 13th, 2012, she was ordained as a rabbi by the Reform Seminary, Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Los Angeles. In 2013, Dr. Adler became the first person to hold the Rabbi David Ellenson Chair in Jewish Religious Thought at Hebrew University College. In 1999, her book, Engendering Judaism, An Inclusive Theology and Ethics, was the first time the National Jewish Book Award for Jewish Thought was ever awarded to a female theologian. I want to thank Dr. Adler for being here. Most important, I need to thank her for the glossary at the end of the book, which I referred to many, many, many times while I was reading the book. And I learned so much about the cycles of the Jewish year, highlighting holy days and festival days. It was very interesting to me. You're going to tell we have a lot of pet lovers here today, Dr. Adler. And we often wonder what our pets are thinking about in those many long hours they're alone. So probably one of my favorite parts of your book was when the Holy Mysticat lies on holy books to absorb their textual content. You covet this ability more than any of his other powers. The only way I learn Torah is to pound it into my head with multiple repetitions. And that just made me laugh out loud because, again, we are so used to our pets 22 hours a day. And what are they thinking about? He's thinking about Torah, and look how you have to, work at that. So without further delay, we would like to welcome you to Sun City Center, Florida, and to Temple. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here. And we may get a visit from my current live-in TA, Nechemele, who is a very different personality from the Holy Mysticat of blessed memory. So you'll just notice if a tail wraps around my neck, that's Nechemele. So how did this all come to be? Well, a professor living alone gets lonely. So in 2007, I got a cat from a shelter. Even when he was gaunt and caged, his face had a haunting spiritual beauty. Somehow his face just called to me, although the cat himself was, shall we say, reserved. Oddly enough, he scrutinized me almost as if he were assessing a job candidate. I brought this enigmatic creature home, and he soon began vocalizing with a huge variety of sounds at the window several times a day. Now, animal behaviorists say that a cat can make about 100 different sounds. In his relations with me, however, the only thing he ever said was meow. The other 99 sounds were reserved for whatever he was doing at the window. And that turned out to be davening, praying in a traditional way, similar to the way I pray, but with a different set of phonemes. Before I had grasped the implications of his behavior, I named him Dagesh, because in Hebrew, a dagesh is the grammatical mark that's associated with emphasis or intensity. I never learned his biography, although obviously he had gone to a good yeshiva and, while still a promising mystic kitten, had been instructed in the hidden Torah confided only to mystics. Some disaster drove him out. He became Navanad Ba'aretz, a restless wanderer in the earth, as it says about Cain. He was apprehended for loitering in downtown Glendale and imprisoned in the shelter from whence I took him home. Even after I recognized his behavior as prayer, he never davened with me. And in fact, at first seemed nonplussed by my talit and tefillin. Although, as you will read in the book, he not only developed a tolerance, but eventually developed a tefillin ritual that coincided with mine. He was most enthusiastic when I was learning. The very sound of people learning excited him. Thick volumes of Talmud and lexicons piled on the table impelled him to jump up and rub against them, purring ecstatically. It was oddly like having a scholarly roommate, but one who never helped clean up or put back the books. That rang a bell. It reminded me of long ago when I was an Orthodox Rebbitzin, although admittedly never a very well-behaved one. To make a long story short, Dagesh turned out to be the Holy Mysticat. Now, if you've read any memoirs of the miracles or wise sayings or teachings of great rabbis, maybe something like Martin Buber's Tales of the Hasidim, you'll recognize the genre in which I wrote these tales. Traditionally, these are tales about a holy man. In my stories, however, the holy teacher is a cat who just happens to be a reincarnated Jewish mystic. Another difference is that traditionally in these kinds of books, the biographer is a guy who knows the tzaddik, the holy rabbi, intimately and is utterly devoted to serving him. Now, demonstrably, I am not a man. Moreover, while I was conscientious in attending to the Mysticat's needs, I was not that impressed by his theology. And recording his sayings and doings for posterity was not my top priority. To his outrage, I revealed myself as a feminist theologian and legal scholar, actively engaged in guerrilla tactics to question and rewrite certain features of Jewish law. Yet, strangely enough, although the Holy Mysticat strongly deplored these unladylike projects, he was shocked to discover that he felt affection for this woman of whom he could not approve. And I was equally shocked to find that I loved this furry little sexist, even though I cannot understand anything about mysticism and have no sympathy at all for misogyny. We were an odd couple for 11 unforgettable years. I never intended to write a book of the tales of the Holy Mysticat. I posted these stories on Facebook, frankly, as a sneaky way of getting more Jewish education into my students. It was all a huge joke until Maggie Anton, the novelist and proprietor of Banot Press, became determined to publish the collected tales. Now, this is hardly an academically respectable project, but I finally agreed, equipping the book with a set of appendices, which I understand from Joellen are actually useful. There's that outline of the cycle of the Jewish year and the meanings of its festivals. There's a timeline for events and famous people in Jewish history, which I might say adds a whole lot more women than these timelines usually do. There's an explanation of how Jews read sacred text, which is different from the way other religions understand their texts. And there are brief essays on the kinds of Jewish literatures that are referenced in the tales. And for those who don't know Hebrew or Aramaic or Yiddish, all languages in which the Holy Mysticat was fluent, in addition, of course, to cat, there is a glossary as well. Now, I have to admit that the glossary does not cover cat because I'm not fluent myself in that language, although I do recognize cat swear when I hear it. What I ended up with is a hybrid, an offbeat fantasy supported by solid educational resources. Every so often, someone will ask me, do you really believe your cat was a reincarnated mystic who spoke to you? This is precisely the kind of reader who asks, why does the Torah talk about Balaam having a talking donkey in Numbers 22, when it's been scientifically proven that donkeys never speak biblical Hebrew? These are the same sort of people who are bothered by Aesop's fables because tortoises and hares don't set up foot races. Readers who are literalists are only going to be annoyed by Tales of the Holy Mysticat. They shouldn't bother buying it. But people who like fables and riddles and paradoxes and puzzles might enjoy this book. It's best taken in small portions, a few stories at a time. The Mysticat and I lived Jewish lives governed by the Jewish year and Jewish obligations. And that's the way these stories are arranged in the book. If you find yourself saying, huh? Or what's that? You can go to the glossary or the appendices, and then you'll get the joke. For Jews, this is a learned way of playing with Judaism, which is a perfectly traditional activity. So I'm going to read you a few stories. There are a couple of stories about night in here because night is a very special time for mystics. But one of them focuses on the exact middle of the night, midnight, the exact middle of the watches of the night, as the Talmud calls them. The Talmud says that at midnight, King David's harp, hanging where the midnight wind could stir the strings, would begin to play melodies by itself. And the king would wake up and start to sing psalms. This time of night is also when mystics awaken and recite the liturgy known as the Midnight Lament, Tikkun Chatzot. And that's what the Mysticat did. If I had known that the Mysticat engaged in this particular service at midnight and would insist upon doing so at the bedroom window, I might have had some hesitations, but I had already taken him home when I discovered that this was his tradition. Now, you may not be familiar with this service because only mystics say it. It starts with a traditional confession, although, frankly, penitence does not come easily to cats. The Mysticat would do this and proceed through then the wailing lamentations of the first part of the service, Tikkun Rachel, and move on to the yearning psalms of the second part, Tikkun Leah. And thus the Mysticat, a feline Jacob, would reach out to the Rachel, the Rachel and Leah aspects of the divine, the Shekhinah. The Rachel face of the divine exemplifies the compassionate, immanent presence, exiled and wandering the world along with the Jewish people, while the transcendent Leah face of the divine looks beyond the world. Ironically, like most mystics, the Mysticat takes the giving and gentleness of human females as his unquestionable due, while striving mightily to grasp the enigma of these elusive feminine aspects of the deity. From the end of this liturgy until the boundary of dawn, the Mysticat performs his most mundane duty as a ferocious watch cat protecting his household from things that go bump in the night. These malevolent beings include both mazikin, destroyers, a common species of demon, and human malefactors. The Mysticat is versed in arcane spells against the Mazikin and against the disaffected feminist Lilith, who is said to overtake men at night, although this rumor may be a projection on the part of gentlemen whose own sexual dealings are by no means egalitarian. Against housebreakers, he has the more prosaic defense of remarkably sharp teeth, as well as claws, adept at shredding. The Mysticat would not hesitate to use these weapons, despite the nightly lesson of Tikkun Chatzot, the divine attribute of severe justice, the Midat Hadin, makes more sense to the Mysticat than the divine attribute of mercy, the Midat HaRachamim. Isn't it simpler, he asks, just to bite sinners? Regarding teshuvah, self-transformation through repentance, the Mysticat is a bit of a skeptic. He's truly convinced of only one of the manifold activities of mercy, and the evidence for this divine activity is satisfyingly concrete, rather than stuck in the theological stratosphere. As Psalm 145 puts it, you open your hand and satisfy to repletion all living things. Now there's an evidence of mercy you can get your teeth into. And so the most merciful of the morning activities, the manifest proof of divine mercy, is in fact Mysticat breakfast. Now, how many dog people do we have here? Any dog people? A couple, yeah, definitely. This is a story about a dog on the Mysticat's turf. And I titled it, if you'll forgive me, The Canine Horror. Today, Eileen Cohn came over to learn with me in preparation for her teaching on Parashat Balak, that's Numbers 22 to 24. She had brought the Eitz Chaim, some other Torah commentaries, and her Balak, Bilam, and donkey puppets. She's a puppeteer. She also brought her little dog, Chipper. Now, in principle, the Holy Mysticat approves of interspecies tolerance. After all, not everyone can be a cat. He's been fairly gracious to me, but dogs are a delicate issue. The topic came up recently when my grandson Michael declared that he had a Mystidog. Now, the Mysticat is an acosmic mystic. That means that he believes that the entire creation is part of God. Everything. Well, if that's what you believe, you really have to acknowledge that dogs must be as much a part of God as anything else in the creation. However, the Mysticat added, he had never encountered a dog who knew Chumash with Rashi, much less the esoteric literature of Jewish mysticism. A dog might be part of a part of God, but an aware part of God? A scholar? A mystic? Unlikely. It happened that today, when Chipper and Eileen appeared at the door, the Mysticat was in the bedroom closet, engaged in profound meditation. We decided that rather than interrupt his holy activities, we should just close the bedroom door. That way we wouldn't disrupt him with our boisterous Torah study at the dining room table, already piled with lexicons, Michot Gedolot, other reference works. Chipper was pleased to encounter Rashi and the other commentators. Eileen and I became absorbed in one of the great comic narratives of the Torah, that of the talking donkey. Suddenly we noticed that Chipper had made himself very much at home. The Mysticat, an abstemious ascetic, had partaken only sparingly of his morning meal. Chipper, in the time we were studying, had polished off both wet food and dry food and drunk deeply from the Mysticat's personal water fountain. As Amos says, I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I could prophesy with some certainty that if the Mysticat caught Chipper's scent on his dishes and fountain, it would be a bad day for interspecies tolerance. Happily, Chipper had shown no interest in the living room rug, which would hold scent better than the wood floors. He had made no effort to resurrect the mousy with which the Mysticat practices the resurrection of the dead, the miracle at which the prophets Elijah and Elisha were expert. Chipper probably wouldn't have known step one in the process any more than I do myself. But he did get the point of Numbers 22 and 23 and observed dryly that the donkey was not the biggest ass in the narrative. While Eileen collected her books and a sated Chipper thanked me for hospitality, I embarked on a meticulous purification of the Mysticat's dishes and fountain, involving soap and copious hot water. As Ezekiel promises, I shall sprinkle pure water upon you and you shall be pure. So I refilled the fountain, put fresh food in the dishes, and cautiously opened the bedroom door. The Holy Mysticat emerged slowly from his afternoon of contemplation. Occasionally he sniffed the floor as if puzzled, but ultimately he nibbled a little and then settled down. I wasn't alarmed by his light appetite. I knew he would get to his other food after he had worked up an appetite performing his nighttime watch cat and demon patrol activities. I did not mention Chipper's visit, and he did not ask. Naturally, if asked point blank, I could not reconcile it with my conscience to dissimulate, but as the English say, least said, soonest mended. I'll give you one more story. This one is from the month of Adar, and that's the month in which Purim occurs. Let me just shut this thing up. That's better. It's entitled, No Food, No Torah. Im ein Kemach, Ein Torah. Today, the Holy Mysticat reluctantly made one of his periodic visits to the vet so that his razor-sharp nails could be clipped and I could replenish the household supplies of wet and dry food. He had many objections to this outing, all articulated in the best Talmudic fashion. First, today is Rosh Chodesh, the new moon of the month of Adar, and we're told that when Adar comes in, we should increase our joy. However, a visit to the vet decreases joy. Second, the whole expedition would result in bitul Torah, a waste of time that could have been devoted to Torah study. Third, the Mysticat argued his sharp claws were necessary to keep the mazikin, the demons, at bay. And fourth, a great tzaddik ought to be able to delegate grocery shopping to his assistant. After all, what was he paying me for? I respectfully pointed out that I would experience an increase in joy if he didn't scratch me. Accidentally, I'm sure, but still drawing blood. And what about what it says in Leviticus? You shall not stand idly by your neighbor's blood. Second, I reminded the Mysticat that he had many texts committed to memory and could easily occupy himself with them on his journey. If he would go over Tractate Megillah in anticipation of Purim, it might raise his spirits. Third, the Holy Mysticat is so well versed in incantations that vaporize demons that he need never lift a paw. And finally, I reminded the tzaddik, he does not exactly pay me, although I'm sure that I acquire much merit from my services as his assistant. We did need the food, for it says in Pirkei Avot, if there is no food, there can be no Torah. And it would be thoughtful of the Mysticat if we could get his nails clipped at the same time. Now, when a debate stands without resolution in either direction in the Talmud, they call it a teku. That's what it was, teku. The Mysticat then, he and I engaged in our other business, but while he was otherwise occupied, I got out the cat carrier and stealthily closed the bedroom door. I'm getting too old to lie on the floor to extract the Mysticat from under the bed. Strolling by, the Mysticat perceived the carrier and immediately dashed to the study, dived under his towel, and immersed himself passionately in his Bitul Hayesh exercises. In these, the mystic attempts to abnegate his somethingness and reduce himself to nothing. Only a very faint suggestion of somethingness was apparent under the towel, but at the appointed hour, I unfairly used the advantages of my size and musculature to transfer the tzaddik to the carrier. I sincerely hope that his many colorful imprecations in Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish, and Cat will remain unfulfilled despite the maxim, the Holy One decrees, the righteous decrees, and the Holy One fulfills it. Because, citing one favorite Yiddish curse as example, I would not like to own 1,000-room hotel and drop dead in every room. For one thing, being an assistant, the gabait, is hard enough without going into the hospitality industry, for which I have absolutely no aptitude. And furthermore, dropping dead just once seems to me entirely sufficient. The less said about our outing, the better. Once home, the Mysticat retired to sulk in the closet until Shabbat candle lighting. Rosh Chodesh was over, but it would still be the month of Adar for another 28 days. Plenty of time to get his joy on, I reminded the holy creature. He sniffed. I did notice, however, that he consumed a more than adequate Shabbat dinner. It is now your turn. If you have questions or observations, you are invited.
Barbara Grossman, are you going to be monitoring? Do we have any hands up for Dr. Adler at this point? Unmute, Barbara.
You're not unmuted yet.
Yeah.
Barbara Gross, okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch, but I'm gonna keep myself muted. But I'm gonna watch. No, I'll keep unmuted. Okay. So right now I don't see anyone yet.
I don't see a chat button down there where people could put in questions.
It's not a
Got
chat.
away with the chat because early on when we were doing Zoom, it became a distraction. So we have used the icon to raise hands and have people ask their questions in person. And Marion has a question.
Yeah, Lynn does too.
Actually, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. When you, this has nothing to do with anything except a memory. When you mentioned Muzikim, the plural of muzik, when I was growing up, my grandmother, every time I saw her, called me a lousy little muzik. Because I was always playing some joke on her, or my sister and I were always, doing something specifically that she said not to do. And when you mentioned that word, I haven't heard it in so long. So it took me back to childhood when I must have been a muzik. Maybe I still am, I don't know. Thank you. It was just so wonderful listening to you.
Let me give you a little comfort about having been called a mazik. There is also a custom among Ashkenazim, and I'm thinking maybe your grandmother, you're an Ashkenazi Jew. There's a custom of averting the attention of the evil eye from a precious child by calling the child mazik, demon, or ugly, or something that will make the evil eye feel, oh, this is not really a desirable target. I'll just go away and look elsewhere. So there might be some of that in there too.
Yeah.
Although I have to acknowledge that for years, my younger sister thought that Vilde Chaya was her Hebrew name.
My sister's dog, a little poodle, was named Vilde Chaya.
Uh,
As a puppy, that's just what she was, a Vilde.
Vilde Chaya, Chaya is a wild animal.
Yes,
So Vilde Chaya, a wild animal.
and she was.
Who was it, Lynn?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You personally made a journey from being Orthodox to Reform, and you also, I think, referred to yourself as kind of a feminist rabbi. Could you talk about,
Kind of doesn't begin to describe it.
can you talk about those things?
Yeah, I can. I guess I should say that in some ways I'm the lunatic fringe of Reform Judaism. I have a great interest in Jewish law and some facility with it. And I think, given that law just by nature is always being rewritten, and halakha also is being rewritten, although I think not fast enough. It seemed as if somehow there were not enough women engaged in the process. So I decided to become helpful with that. I first decided to become helpful with that in 1971. I wrote an article called "The Jew Who Wasn't There," which is generally considered to be the first piece of second wave Jewish feminist writing. And then, proceeded to write a bunch more stuff over the years to sort of encourage that happening. In Engendering Judaism, the book that won the award, what I proposed is a different legal model for getting married. And the first one that I did, I produced for a gay couple. The second one for me. And the great advantage of this wedding ceremony is that the woman does not become acquired by the man. They both acquire the covenantal relationship, but they don't acquire one another. And consequently, it's set up like a business partnership in Jewish law, which means that if one person wants out, that person's out. So there isn't a problem about divorces. There are people using that ceremony. There's still, in certain quarters, a great deal of outrage about it and me. But hey, I've had 50 years to get used to people being outraged at me. I'm pretty good at it now. And it seemed like a really useful thing to do. So I should say, it's not, first of all, I don't think you convert from, to or from Orthodoxy. All of these are kind of flexible boundaries within Judaism. And I think it's possible to move from one to the other as you choose. I would say that there's still a sizable piece of Orthodox Jew inside me. I keep a strictly kosher home. I am careful about what I do and don't do on Shabbat. A lot of the things that I do are traditional. I started putting on tefillin when I was Orthodox, and that was not a usual thing for women to do. I have to say that my then husband was tremendously supportive about that and about all of the other fuss that I was kicking up. A decent person. So I get still angry when people stereotype Orthodox Jews, because there's a whole range of orthodoxies from right to left. And I'm still on very good terms with a lot of the folks on the left. Other questions? Please.
When you began to speak, your dialogue brought me right back to what we called the Church Street Shul in Lynn, Massachusetts. It wasn't, of course, named the Church Street Shul, but that's where it was. And I dutifully sat in the balcony, and I knew that all the action was on the floor. So when you talked about davening, yes, I remember davening. I remember the men davening and doing what my family referred to, or my mother referred to, as shuckling. So what I would like to know is, did your cat shuckle? Does your cat, do cats shuckle when they daven? It's important to know.
Well, first of all, if you are ever in Israel, you should go to an Orthodox shul called Shira Hadasha in Jerusalem, where that was founded by Dr. Tova Hartman, and some other equally very, very educated Orthodox women and men. It has a mechitza that runs down the center of the shul, and in the very middle, between the men's section and the women's section, and there is not a curtain on it, is the shulchan, the table at which Torah is held.
Yeah.
Both men and women have aliyot. Both men and women read from the Torah. And so it is not as purely egalitarian as a conservative or reform shul might be, but it's definitely getting there. It's a lot different from sitting in the balcony. And as far as shuckling is concerned, shuckling is really, this is a thing that Ashkenazic Jews do.
That's right.
If you were at a Yemenite shul or something like that, all of the gestures would be different. But I can't daven without shuckling. I can't at all. And I go at my own speed. And I, on weekdays wear tefillin. And when I say an Amidah, I put my talit over my head. And so when I daven at HUC, I daven in the back of the room. And in fact, I produced a document for my liturgy students that is called a guide for non-conforming daveners. Because, if you were in an Orthodox or conservative shul, there are lots of non-conforming daveners, and everybody kind of takes that for granted. I think Reform Judaism needs to be educated about non-conforming daveners. But if you're a non-conforming davener, here are the basic things you need to know. One, there are a few times in the service when you absolutely must conform. Somebody says Baruch Hu, you got to answer that. Somebody says a Kaddish, you've got to answer that. Somebody says a Kedusha, you've got to stop what you're doing and respond appropriately to the Kedusha. Those are duties for anybody who's in that community. Aside from that, if you're going to be a non-conforming davener, then it's courteous to be in the back of the room where you won't distract other people. But otherwise, go to it.
So isn't the notion of a guide and non-conforming a bit oxymoronic? It's all right. It's okay.
In Orthodox services, there are so many people who aren't conforming. Frankly, Orthodox and conservative, kind of right conservative services. One of the things that I most miss about going to shul, which you can't do during the pandemic, is that at the appropriate times, when you didn't have an obligation to respond or to stand in place, you could socialize.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. That I don't like so much about Reform services is that that's frowned upon. I think socializing during services is very comforting to people. It makes people happy, especially on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a long day. Why shouldn't people, if you're really going to have a schmooze, you should step out of the shul. That's polite. In more traditional services, there's a constant stream.
That's right.
Up and going.
Right.
It makes it a lot easier to stay in there if you have a ground rule that says when you get asked, you can get up and go out, and then you can come back when you're ready.
Right.
Oh boy.
Thank you, Raquel, for validating my. As you know, my husband is an expert Torah chanter. So leading up to the high holidays, I hear the Torah portion being chanted constantly as he practices before Rosh Hashanah. So as soon as they do the Torah service, I'm out of there. And that's my chance, well, first to go to the bathroom, but also to schmooze, or just not, to sit in a more comfortable chair or walk around and stretch my back. And That's one thing that I do, even though we're in a reform shul. And I also want to point out, in terms of mechitzas, as you know, I belong to a what's known as a gay and lesbian shul, and I always kind of wondered, doesn't the mechitza not serve its traditional purpose if all the women are on one side and all the men are on the other side? But those are exactly the people who are going to be looking for licit and illicit relationships on their side.
Someday I'm going to do some teaching about genders in Judaism. And I think it would be a really useful thing. I was just talking the other day with some of my students about a section of the Mishnah. It's Mishnah Bikurim, that has a part of it that's really a kind of later and addition, Maggie knows this, called Mishnah Androgynos. Mishnah Androgynos sets out 4 genders. And if you read Gemara, not on Mishnah Androgynos, because there isn't any Gemara on the whole Mishnah Bikurim, but in other places in the Gemara adds 2 more genders to that. So the Gemara has 6 genders. So we are, those of us who are still thinking of there's 2 genders, male and female, are a little behind because the Talmud has 6. And the Talmud prescribes what the obligations are for these genders. But as I say, law is something that gets rewritten all the time. We could redefine genders, and according to what we see around us, which is also a legal principle, you look at what's around you, and then you see what has to be addressed. And we could redefine what the obligations of all those genders are, and what the obligations of the rest of us, those of us who fit into one of the genders that we're more familiar with, have toward those other genders. Think about it.
It is a fascinating section, especially the rabbis, like, who can marry whom, who is supposed to do the various mitzvot that only men are supposed to do, but they have 6 genders. And it's a very serious discussion. What are the obligations and what are the prohibitions on all these different genders? And what I remember, of course, you have a big, long discussion without, and the whole thing is teku. I mean, there's no big decision at the end, but which implies you could do whatever rabbi says that you agree with or come up with your own. And I think that would be a really great, okay, Rachel, your next publication.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was really an eye opener. That in modern, in these days could be quite enlightening and educational for everybody.
Yeah.
There are a couple of people who have worked on those issues. I'm just trying to find this here. There is a trans Jewish scholar who produced a book called balancing on both sides of the mechitza. And I cannot find the reference right now, but it is a very, very useful book. And it has a reading of Mishnah Androgynos with that scholar's commentary that I think is very useful. Also, there are several scholarly articles by Professor Sarah Lev at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College that address some of those Talmudic gender categories. And the thing that she says that I thought was very interesting is she can pretty much prove that the rabbis got those some of those additional categories from Greek and Roman medical books.
Oh, that makes sense.
Which is interesting. It says to me a couple of things. One thing it says is that when they talked about stuff and thought that they didn't know enough about it, they looked at the wisdom in the cultures that were around them, and that seems like a very reasonable thing to do. The other thing that I wonder about is how credible were those Greek and Roman medical authorities, because I kind of doubt that any of them were non-binary.
Well, not only that, they believed in the diseases caused by demons and evil eye and the imbalance of humors, and that the man's seed has the entire baby in it, and the woman is just the dirt in which he plants his seed in there. I mean, Greek and Roman medical books are not all that useful, shall we say.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody believes that stuff. But also, I mean, aside from they didn't know from non-binary, they tended to radically underestimate the contributions of women. So that right there, and I wish I could say that medical research today was so advanced that it thought about all these things, but a lot of times it isn't. They're still using kinds of measurements on which they've used all of the data was based on men, which is why you should all read, go to your Google and find out what are the signs of heart attacks in women, because you should know those things. And sometimes your medical facilities really haven't got a clue about them. Well, that's a sobering note. I hope you have
we shouldn't end the discussion on such a unfortunate topic.
Marilyn.
I don't even know where that tradition comes from, but we see it even in the Torah that they added stuff on at the end of some of the prophets to make it sound and on a more uplifting note. Well, I think we have the Hashki Venu at the I can't remember, is the end of Lamentations, the end of Jeremiah, or
yeah. Marilyn. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
You had said earlier that you were on good terms with Jews of all stripes. Are they on good terms with you? I mean, how much pushback have you gotten for all your ideas? And what forms has it taken?
I have friends and teachers among left-wing orthodoxy, in the conservative movement, you know, as well as in reform and reconstructionist. I try to learn from everybody, and a lot of people do seem to try to learn from me. There are also, you know, there are people who are just never they're just not very intellectually flexible. So you just have to keep saying what your truth is. That's all you can do.
I'm not sure what left-wing orthodoxy is as opposed to right-wing orthodoxy.
You should know that there is a very active and interesting left-wing orthodoxy. And they are ordaining women. That's why there are now female Orthodox rabbis. And there's, you know, methods of looking at texts are also, I think, more sophisticated in many ways, in terms of having a input from contemporary scholarship. Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz is a kind of model of someone who is not only engaged in social critique, but in social activism. And he is one of those left-wing Orthodox rabbis, also has a PhD. There are people doing interesting things in left-wing Orthodoxy. And it seems to me very, very appropriate that, and even urgent, as Judaism becomes a smaller religion, we have to make the boundaries between the different branches of Judaism much more permeable, much more flexible, because we can't afford to count anybody out.
Just
Okay, Dr. Adler,
Yes.
I am Marcia Letterberg, and I am co-chair with Jo Ellen Bromberg for this wonderful, wonderful program. I mean, you are just an incredible woman. You really are. I just loved, forgetting about the book, which I didn't understand a lot of, but listening to you talk made a lot of what I didn't understand come together for me, because I really didn't have a Jewish background growing up. And you're incredible. I don't know how you get these ideas. And it's fabulous. It really is. It's fabulous. And laughing, smiling, laughing and smiling and learning. And it's just, you're just an incredible person. I can't wait for your next book, please. And with that, does anybody have one more question before we leave. Anybody? No?
Well, if they don't, I have something to say. I want to tell you a little story.
Okay.
Just to end. A long time ago, I think it was in the very beginning of the 1990s, there was no place that women who weren't in rabbinical school could learn Talmud in the city of Los Angeles.
1992.
And I created the first women's Talmud class for just any women who were interested in learning Talmud. And I had a student in that class named Maggie Anton. And Maggie Anton really took to Talmud. And she became really a pretty formidable scholar herself, and an imaginative one, because she then wrote a series of novels called Rashi's Daughters, and a series of novels about the daughter of the Talmudic sage Rav Chisda. What I'm trying to say is, it's not so much that I'm an incredible woman. It's that somebody gave me a chance to learn, and all of you can learn. And I think all of you can be pretty incredible. So what I most dislike is the idea that you grew up with, that you weren't entitled to learn this stuff. That's crap. You deserve to learn it, and you're able to learn it. And I hope for all of you that you will find settings in which you can learn it.
And I agree with that. I do. And thank goodness for our rabbi. She's got classes and classes and classes, even during this pandemic, where if you want to, you can learn. It's an incredible world right now. And we just have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And again, I thank you. I do. I thank you for this book and this incredible story. And again, we're all waiting for your next book.
And we're all waiting for Maggie's next book too.
Yes.
Well, that's another talk, another time. I think I've spoken with your synagogue.
Yeah.
On every one of my books, including when you were at your other synagogue.
That's right.
Where the climate was less hospitable.
The climate was indeed less hospitable. But then you spoke to us from an airport.
Oh, that was some story. Oh, God. Yeah. Way before there was Zoom. I Skyped with your synagogue because my flight from wherever the heck I was.
Jacksonville. You were in Jacksonville.
I was in Jacksonville.
You were in Jacksonville then.
And I Zoomed from the airport. I mean, I did.
We did Skype.
We did Skype. That was pre-Zoom.
Yeah.
You can imagine.
Yeah.
But we weren't going to give up that easy, I'll tell you.
Yeah. It wasn't quite like landing on the moon, but it felt very close to making those arrangements.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
Exactly.
Well, speaking of arrangements, I'd like to thank Maggie. I didn't realize you were on screen until you started speaking, Mrs. Joellen, for just helping get this
All right.
program to our members, taking care of ordering the books. And again, anyone who got a book, you'll notice that Dr. Adler signed it and the illustrator signed it. Maggie, I wish you would have signed it too. But I thank you for all your help. It was difficult, just with time changes and being on email, but you made the transition so easy, and I thank you.
Oh, it was indeed my pleasure. As was this, and I didn't ask in advance, and so there's nothing I can do about it now, but I really, really hoped that you taped this, that you videoed it.
We did.
Oh, we
We
did. Yeah.
did.
As the famous saying goes, Lordy, Lordy, I'm hoping there's tapes. So I will
We
be
heard that.
talking about how to get a copy of that video so I can put it up on the Mysticat website.
Yeah,
I will send you the link once it's published.
Thank you so much. This was great, Rachel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
have a good week, everyone. Take care. Be safe.
Yes.
Amen.
Watch for the email about Tu B'Shvat.
Yes.
Bye.